Good afternoon. Welcome to Customizing Widgets for the JavaScript API. I have two co-presenters here. My name is Matt Driscoll. I'm here with Juan Carlos Franco, who goes by Franco, and Alan Sangma. Me and Franco are on the JavaScript API team, and we focus on primarily the widget API and creating widgets for our API. Alan is in our creative lab, and he focuses more on styling, user interface, accessibility, user experience, stuff like that. So on the agenda today for today's session, we're going to talk about what kind of customizations you can do with widgets. We're going to cover a few different approaches for customizing widgets along with demos. And then we'll have a little bit of time for questions and answers. So, customizing widgets. When we say that, we mean being able to theme a widget, change like its color, sizing, font, style, anything presentation related. We also, by customizing, we mean implementing a widget in a different framework or in a different view, or also just altering the presentation of a widget to do something different, more or less. So here are the three customization approaches. One is authoring a different theme for the widgets. So you could take the widget theme and tweak it to make things look completely different. Maybe you want different sizing for stuff. Maybe you want different layout. You could also recreate one of our widget views to look completely different and function differently than it does now, but kind of use the same logic. Or you could take a widget that you like that needs something else added to it and extend it to be able to add functionality to it. So with that, you guys ready? We're going to go through these three approaches, and we kind of have like an 8-bit video game theme going on, so you kind of notice that throughout the presentation. So for the first approach, I'm going to kick it over to Alan, and he's going to talk about how you guys can theme widgets.
All right. So let's talk about theming. First of all, why don't we get into the why, like why you would want to theme your widgets. One reason you'd maybe want to theme your widgets is to match branding, either your own branding or the branding of the people you're making your application for. You might also want to match the theme of the map. So if you have a certain type of symbology and colors and whatnot, you may want it to look like that. On the other side of that, you may want it to contrast the map so that the controls of the application stand out a little bit more, are distinct from the symbology. Another reason you might want to theme the widgets for your application is to consider the environment. Probably the easiest example is if you know that your application is going to be used at night a lot, using like a dark theme might be a good example, a good thing to do at that point. And then one other reason is to think about that end user, if they maybe need to have bigger buttons based on their capacities, how they're operating. Maybe they're using big gloves or something like that, and you just kind of need to update the interface a little bit for that. Quick little chat about the technology we use for the themes. Basically what we do to generate the CSS. We use Sass to create our CSS, and then basically Node and Grunt to do the compiling. You can, if you want to kind of learn more about that, you can go to these websites and check that out. Those links will be in the slide deck. The reason we're using Sass is because it makes it a lot easier for us to compile CSS because it has a lot of power. It's modular. It makes it so that we're not having to repeat a lot of code, and really it makes theming really easy. So previously on theming, life was hard. In order to really make your own theme for the widgets, you had to do a whole bunch of stuff. You had a whole bunch of steps and put stuff in the right place and stuff like that. And then you would usually go to step 6 and wonder why there's an easier way. Well, guess what? There is an easier way. And that easier way is to get our theme utility use the utility, and then customize your theme using that utility. So let me get into the specifics of this. Oh, and then also you'll want to obviously host your CSS file that the utility renders wherever you want to host that. What this looks like when we talk about the specifics is you're going to go to the JS API styles Git repo. I'll show you the URL to that in just a second. You'll run npm install, and then you'll look for the main.css SCSS file, edit that, and then use the distributed CSS file. The other thing is when you're using that theme file, I don't think we covered this last year, but when you use that theme file, you don't have to include the core theme CSS file. The theme file that's rendered by the utility it includes all the styles you need. So step one, clone the repo. So I would go over here to this on GitHub, JC Franco. It's in Franco's repo right now, and I think at some point in the future we'll make this part of the Esri repo, so it's all kind of together. But this is where you'll find it now. And then you'll clone that repo. Once you clone that repo, it's going to look basically like this. If you look at this folder structure over here, there's not a lot here. But then once you go to step 2 and run npm install, it's going to install all the necessary bits that you'll need. It'll set up a sample theme directory, just like you used to have to do manually. And then it'll also compile the CSS in the dist folder from that Sass file. And then it'll also even spin up a server with a preview application. So I went ahead and kind of have this running, so we didn't have to wait for it to run here, but you can kind of see the stuff that happened. So let's see what that looks like. I'm going to switch projects here. So now that npm install has been run, we've got a few more directories. This is just for the demo here, so you won't see this directory in your computer. But this is the distribution folder where we have our rendered CSS file. In the preview folder is the app, which is running over here in this. Oops. Sorry. Lost this one. Which is running over here. It's been running over here the whole time. You didn't see that. So this is the app that's running this right here, being live updated. And here is really kind of the business. So in Sass, my theme, and then main, this is the theme, the Sass theme that is being used to style this here. So I can show you really quick. If I change something like one of our Sass variables, like background color, and I'm going to make it super awesome, 100% red, and then save that, you'll see this live updates. Super awesome, maybe not. So let me reset that. So that's basically how that works. And you might be tempted to do something like, do an inspection and find out what the class selectors are, and then go in here and start writing a bunch of CSS. And so this will style it pretty nicely. But if we have a look at our CSS file, let me prettify this really quick so we can see what it actually looks like. At the bottom of it, it's just added these styles to it, right? And this isn't very good practice, so this is not something we want to do. So I'm not going to save that. So instead what we want to do is we want to overwrite the Sass variables. Before we get into that though, we're going to talk a little bit about the theme structure. The theme structure is set up so that we have color, size, and type. So there's 3 files for each one of these parts of the theme, and they're named pretty appropriately. And so what you'll want to do is you can go inspect those Sass files, see what the variables are, and then overwrite them. So looking at the actual Sass file, for instance, if we have a variable that's background color like we just did, it'll have a value, but this here, the default, actually means that if you overwrite that anywhere else, it'll take precedence, so you don't have to worry about like conflicts there. But wait, there's more. We have these 4 kind of core color variables, so specifically about the colors. And if you set those color variables, there's magic under the hood. Well, not really magic, basically just a bunch of calculations. So hover states, borders, things like that, it will use those 4 main variables and using the Sass power of calculation to generate a whole bunch of other colors. So you don't necessarily have to go in and overwrite all those variables, unless you want to. So let's get back into the demo, making a theme. So let's say I want to make a dark theme. It would be really easy to do that by just overriding 4 main variables. So I'm just going to paste those in there, save this, and we should see this guy update. So that's pretty quick. We're not having to write a whole bunch of selectors. We're able to just overwrite some variables. Maybe I want a little bit of blue in there. It's a nice, slick, clean theme. If any of you have seen some of our default themes, you'll probably recognize this one. This is the dark blue theme. And the dark blue theme has a few other variable overrides as well. But this is about 8-bit, so we're going to like redo this and do a little bit more. So this is more of a Mario theme. So here's our colors. So we'll get some more Mario looking colors. Kind of nice. Let's make these buttons a little bit more chunky. So here I've got some size variables. And let me show you those real quick before I move on. So here's our color variables, whole bunch of variables in here that we can overwrite. Here is our size variables. You can overwrite any of these, type variables, and really anything else you want to overwrite, but these are kind of the 3 main ones. So let's chunk up those buttons a little bit. Some size. There we go. Chunky. And one thing that's really good is a little bit of font work. So we have a little 8-bit font here that we're going to use. Places like this where we're going to need another resource, you'll have to go in and edit your application a little bit, or bring this in a different way. So here, I've already kind of have this line here where we're going to import this Google font. I'm going to save that. I've added the overwrite for the font family variable. Okay. And then reload this guy. Yeah, look at that. And then we have kind of our Mario theme. So, yeah. So to recap, you can use the utility to easily create a theme. The theme is structured around color, size, and typography. And you basically just use the core, look at the core, look at those variables, and then overwrite the variables and try to avoid writing a bunch of CSS classes or selectors, if at all possible. Y'all ready to level up?
All right, thanks, Alan. So now we're going to take it up a notch a little bit. And we're going to talk about views. So this, we're going to talk about a little bit about the widget first before I can get to that, and then we're going to create a custom view for a widget using a ViewModel. So a little bit about widgets. Widgets are composed of both views and ViewModels. This allows it to be reusable. We can easily do user interface replacement, and we can easily integrate a widget's ViewModel into a different framework if we want to. Views. Views are the display of the widget. They're the presentation. They're the user interface. They use its ViewModel to render the user interface. So they kind of like render the logic or smarts of the view model. So all the view specific logic resides inside the view. So anything has to do with presentation, display, just user interface, stuff like that. So working with views, let's look at a sample view. This is the attribution widget, which is by default included in Esri view. So right here you have this little bar at the bottom that shows you what sources are in this map. And what we're going to do is actually create a different look for this widget so that it's not just a tiny bar down there. Maybe you want to bring more attention to the sources. And so looking at this view, we can actually download the widget view if you want. So look at that. So this is the TypeScript widget view for the attribution widget. And you can kind of see what it's doing. You can see its code. You can see what variables, what properties it has, all that kind of stuff. So if you wanted to actually just like tweak this widget a little bit, you could download this, compile it, and then use that widget as a custom widget. It also links to the view model, and it's Sass styling as well. So if you wanted to just change the way font sizes are, colors, you can do that too. And this is hosted on GitHub as well. So there's the styling, the Sass styling for it. Okay, going back to this. Here's a sample. And just kind of show off the attribution. Showing off the layer list widget here because it has a lot of different layers in there. We can kind of see the attribution populate here with all the different layers. If there's a lot of different sources available, what will happen is it'll kind of show a little collapse here, and you can click it and get all of them right there. So that's the attribution widget down here. All right. So this is how the attribution view model is represented in the next upcoming release 4.7. So we have the attribution view model. It has a property called items, which is a collection of attribute items. It has a state, and that state can either be ready or disabled. And it has a view, which is going to populate the attribution items. Here's the attribution item, which is used in the collection up here. It has a layer for its layer, and then the text will be the source text that we display. So let's customize this. We're going to create a custom widget view for the attribution using the attribution view model. So we have a bunch of steps, and what we're going to end up producing is something that looks like this. So we have a table instead of the little bar at the bottom. The table will show a title of each layer, and it'll link out to the layer's service. And then we'll have a type of whatever type of layer it is, and then all the sources. And it's all using an 8-bit theme. So let's follow the steps here. We have to, first thing you want to do is if you're doing this on your own is set up TypeScript and look at our widget development samples there. And then once you do that, once you're set up, you're going to go into the HTML steps, and that's what we'll do right now. So looking in the source code for this repo, we have an attribution start folder. This basically has the file structure, but no code is in it yet. So we have an HTML file that has some code just to set up a map using a web map and a view. So that's all that's in the HTML. Inside our actual app, we have the widget view here, which is just an empty file right now. We're going to populate that. We have a string file to put our labels, and we have a CSS file to put the styles for this widget. So the first thing we want to do is set up Dojo to be able to load our custom widget. So we're going to go up here to the top. Before we get the API, we want to tell Dojo that we have a custom package called demo, and this is where you can get the files for that package. So our app will be stored in the app folder here, and that's what you see right here. Next thing you want to do is actually require our widget. So down here where we require the web map and the map view, we're going to also require attribution table, and make sure to reference that right here. And then after that, we're going to initialize our widget. So after the view, we're going to initialize our widget, and we're going to pass our widget the view. And then we want to actually place the widget in the view. So we're going to place it using the view user interface, and we're going to put the attribution widget on the bottom left of the view. And then lastly, we want to go up here and link to our styles for the widget, which we haven't set up yet, but we want to get them ready. And we're also using a custom font that is a video game themed font. And then one of the last things we want to do is actually turn off the default attribution widget so that we don't see that anymore. So in my view, I'm going to tell it to only use the zoom UI component because we don't want the attribution anymore, so we'll just turn that off. Okay. So now if I go to our start URL here, we're going to get an error because we don't have any code in this attribution widget yet, so that's what we're going to start building now. So I'm going to go back to our steps, and the next steps is setting up our actual view. So this is going to be the main part of the widget development, actually creating a view. And we want to start out with this basic view kind of boilerplate class right here. So we're going to copy that, go into our widget view here, paste that in, and I'll kind of go through the structure. So the first things you'll notice is some TypeScript dependencies up here. We're using a couple of decorators for this widget. This is the main class that we're going to be extending, the Esri Widgets widget. And we're also going to be using TSX for this widget. So this is the actual class. We're calling it attribution table, and it extends widget. And right now we just have a really simple lifecycle, and our render method is just going to return TSX virtual DOM div element with hello dev summit. So we can save that. We can TypeScript compile it, and then go back into our app. And now in the bottom left, where our attribution is going to be, we see the hello dev summit. So we know that our widget's compiled correctly and it's working. Now we just need to add some more logic to this thing to get it to actually show a table. So the next thing we want to do is pull in the attribution view model. So this is what's going to power the logic of this thing. We're going to use all the properties that the view model provides and be able to render that out. So we want to set up a property for the view model as well. So after our lifecycle, I'm going to set up another section called properties. And this is going to use, it's going to be a property we're calling view model, and it's going to be the type of attribution view model. We're saying it's renderable so that anytime this thing changes, we're going to re-render the widget, and we're going to initialize it to an attribution view model. Now you're seeing there's a couple of little warning errors here that it cannot find property. So what we need to do is go and add some of those things into our imports. So if I go up to the top here, right now we just see a declared and subclass. Oh wait, oops, right here. We just see TSX, and we need renderable as well because we have some renderable properties that are going to re-render the widget when they're changed. So I add that there. And then I also need to import the property decorator. So I'm going to update this right here to do that. So now it's getting property. And if I go back down to the view model property I added, those aren't complaining anymore. So the next property I want to add is view. So the user will pass a view to the widget view here. And this is a map view or a scene view. And this will actually be the reference for getting the attribution items. And the same thing again, this is going to be an alias of the view model's view. So we're going to need to import that at the top here as well. alias of. And also, we're going to need to import map view and scene view. So we can go down here, copy those to the top. All right, so now we got a reference to map view and scene view, and so that is no longer complaining. A couple other properties we want to add: IconClass and label. The IconClass will allow us to assign a default CSS class for this widget. So if it's used in like the expand widget or something, it'll know what icon to use for that widget. And a label is a default title for this widget. So if any other widgets will need to reference it, they can say, okay, this is the attribution widget. So we'll put these in the properties as well. And it needs to know about the CSS class we're saying here, and it also needs to know about the item and label we got here. So we're going to add those in. First, let's do the CSS. Go up here to the top. We're just going to define a constant with all the CSS classes we're going to use in this widget, and one of them is that icon class down there. So that will no longer complain about that because we have it referenced. And then we need to pull in the language files for this widget so we can translate it to different languages if we want. So we're going to import that. So this is going to look for this file in NLS attribution table. So right now we have this file right here, which is empty. And we also have a Spanish locale, which is empty. And we're going to populate those. So let's do the main one, the root one first. And this one says what locales are going to be defined. So we copy this. I'm going to put this inside of our, it's this one right here. Okay. So this is the labels we're going to be using in the widget. We're going to have something for the title of the widget. And then when there's no attribution defined, go to the layer's full extent, view the layer's service, and then we have our table columns, title, type, and sources. And so we want to put in our translated text as well. And we'll put that in our Spanish translation. Okay, so we're done with those. Next thing we want to do is set up a watcher for any time that the ViewModel items change. We're going to re-render the widget. So as the map zooms around, new items will come in, if different layers are added, things like that we want to know and re-render the widget. So in our lifecycle, we're setting up post initialize, and we're going to watch anytime the ViewModel items change, schedule render. And this is using a utility called watchUtils, so we need to add that in too. And all this utility does is watch properties for changes and gives you a lot of shorthand methods for doing stuff like that. It's pretty useful. Any accessor class, this is very useful for. And now we want to modify our render method to actually have the table nodes. So currently our render method basically just has that div that says hello dev summit. What we want it to be is a table. So instead of that div with hello dev summit, we're going to render a header row which has those classes we defined at the top, and then also has the labels like column type and column title. And then we're going to make a function to render all the items, all the attribution items. And then we have the actual virtual table node here, the virtual DOM table node. And it has the header, and it has all the items. And then if we don't have any items available in the table, we're going to alternatively display this label saying there's no attribution. So our root node that we're returning here, if the widget state isn't ready, and we have attribution items to display, we're going to display the table. Otherwise, we're going to display the no items node right here. And so we're just returning a div again, but this has a base class, and it has whatever the value of this is going to be. So now it's complaining about this method, which we still need to make. So let's add some private methods here, and that'll kind of finish up our table. Below the public method of render, I'm going to put private methods. And so the first private method is going to be, I think I put something in the wrong spot. Yeah, missing something, maybe. Yeah, okay. I think it's better now. Okay. So the first public or private method we're going to have is render attribution items. This is going to look at the ViewModel items, put them to an array, and basically return a node for each one of those items. So that's going to call this render attribution item right here. We're going to get the text and the layer of the item, and then if the basically if it has an extent, we're going to render a link to be able to go to that extent, the full extent of the layer. If not, we'll just show the title. And then if it has a URL, we're going to show the URL link. Otherwise, we'll just show the type. And then we're basically just returning a table row here with that item's title node, type node, and text. So one of the last things we need to do is handle this accessible handler. So when I go to full extent here, on the link here for going to the full extent, we have an on key down and on click event we're setting up to go to the full extent. And so accessible handler is a nice way to be able to set up those events for you. It'll set up events for enter key and space key, and to kind of make your clicks basically accessible to other users. So we need to import this widget helper right here. So if I go down, copy this, go up to the top where we're requiring all the widget stuff like TSX, right here. I'm gonna paste that in. So now we're getting accessible handler there too. And so now it's not complaining about that anymore. And the last thing we need to do is import extent, because it doesn't know what extent is right now. So we need to get the typings for that. And we'll just put that up here. Okay. So there shouldn't be any more problems. Should be able to compile this, I think. Hopefully it'll work. That looks good. So now let's test it out. Okay. Okay, so now we're seeing a table here with the different layers. It's cool. But we don't have our 8-bit theme style stuff, so we need to add the CSS. So let's do that. And we have all our table CSS right here. We're going to go into our CSS file, put that in, and we basically just we're setting the font size, some colors to be more 8-bit themed, and that's pretty much it in the widths of the table columns. So now, boom, and then hopefully, yep, we got our 8-bit table. So now we have a custom view for our widget. And last thing I want to test is to make sure that our ITNN is working correctly. So I'm just going to set the Dojo locale to Spanish. And right now it's source, type, and title. If I save that, it should, yeah, so now it's in Spanish. So whatever locale is it in, it's going to pull in the correct language file. All right, so there's our cool widget. So just to recap on views, what we learned about widget views, they're the face of the widget, the presentation, they're the user interface. They represent the ViewModel logic, so they take the ViewModel logic and display it out in a user-friendly way. And this allows separation of concern, so we can take the ViewModel and implement it into a totally different looking view, or take the ViewModel and put it into a different framework altogether. So, and I also showed you guys the views can be downloaded on the API docs, and so you could just download that, tweak it, and make it custom. So now it's time to level up again. So I'm going to turn it over to Franco.
Thanks, Matt. All right, So I'm ready to level up. How about you?
I'm ready.
All right, cool. So next level, we'll be extending a view. So first of all, we'll need to cover why we would want to extend a view. And so one of the reasons is you might have already an existing view that does pretty much what you need, and you may need to tweak just one particular item, say the rendering. And another reason is that it keeps you in the same ecosystem. So if you have a particular library that you're using or technology, in our case, the JavaScript API, we can still keep developing in the same ecosystem without any other additional dependencies. Now how? For this session, in my demo, I'll be using the JavaScript API, the incoming 4.7 version. We will be using our base widget class, and I'll talk about it a little bit more in the following slides. And we will also be doing it by writing a little bit of TypeScript, similar to what Matt showed. And okay, so let's get to it. So this is our base widget class, and some of the kind of high-level items that it gives us is that it provides a lifecycle for us. So we have some particular hooks that we can leverage and latch onto. So if we have I'll get into more details in the next slide, but it makes all widgets share a common lifecycle that we can leverage. It also gives us API consistency, and this is because widget is extending accessor, and this is the base class for most of our, if not all of our JavaScript API classes. And you'll see that if you've looked at some of our snippets and the SDK, you'll see that there are a lot of very common patterns for creating your classes, setting properties, and watching properties. So you get the same infrastructure by leveraging this module. So the lifecycle, it starts all in the constructor, and this gets invoked as soon as you create your widget instance. And this would be typically a good place to set up any binding for your events or any logic that needs to run as soon as your widget is created. Then comes post initialize, and this is the place where the widget properties are already good to go. They're wired up, but the widget may not necessarily be rendered at that time, so this is a good point. And in our cases, we use this pretty much all the time to set up all of our watch properties that we're watching and some other initialization logic. Then comes render, which is key for our widgets, and I'll talk about it a little bit more in the following slide. But this is one of the most important aspects of your widget and during its life cycle as well. Then finally comes destroy, which is available for you to call whenever you are done with your widget and you want the widget to release its resources and make it ready for garbage collection. So if you have any resources that are being fetched behind the scenes, or some timers or event handlers going on, this is a good place to set them up for cleanup. So I mentioned render in the previous slide, and what you need to learn or know about this method is that this is where you will be defining your UI, and Matt showed us a little bit how this works, and you'll see more examples of this as I walk through my demo. And the key idea is that it'll react to the widget state. So when it's invoked, the widget, in this method, you are taking the current state of your widget and turning that into a UI that will eventually get rendered in the browser. In our render methods in our code, we use JSX, and this is just a syntax that's very similar to markup, and eventually it gets compiled down to JavaScript. But it's really nice because you get an idea of the markdown that you would expect to see in the browser. And another key item to know is that when you're dealing inside of the render method, you're not necessarily dealing with the real DOM. It's a virtual DOM system. And what you need to know is that whenever render gets called, what you return is kind of a virtual representation of a node from the browser. And behind the scenes, there's another part of the virtual DOM system that will be in charge of rendering that to the browser. And as your render methods get called, the latest virtual node will be compared with the previous one used to render the real browser node. And if there were any real changes, it'll affect the browser, the DOM, and otherwise it'll just get ignored and won't cause any updates to the browser. So we will be using more TypeScript, and I mean, one of the reasons we use it is, as its name implies, it allows us to type our JavaScript. So as we are defining and typing our different interfaces and classes, TypeScript will let us know if we are messing up and passing invalid values or objects that might not necessarily match some signatures that we've defined earlier on. So this is really neat because it'll upfront let you know some errors and kind of give you an early opportunity to fix them as you continue developing. Another neat thing is that it allows us to leverage features that are coming to JavaScript, but right now. So one example of this is arrow functions, and it's kind of a concise way of letting us define functions. Similar feature is template literals, which will allow us to define strings in a very kind of expressive way and still allow us to replace variables inside of the string. And a neat thing to know is that it's widely supported by more and more IDEs. So here are just a few that I'm referenced in this slide. And I know in our team, we typically use Visual Studio Code and WebStorm. So let's get into our demo, and I'll show you exactly what we'll be ending up with. And what I'll be showing is a custom base map gallery, and I have this map here with a base map, an 8-bit theme, color scheme inspired by Mario. And this base map gallery here is styled to be, it's inspired by Mega Man. Now you may be wondering what's Mega Man doing in my Mario base map application. It's 8-bit, so it still works. So let's just carry on with this. So yeah, this is what we'll be building. And I'll go to my starting application. So similar to Matt's demo, I'll get an initial error because as you can see here, there's nothing in my view class. So let's get started. Oh, but before that, I'll just show the index page that I'll be using to demonstrate. So all it's doing, very simple. You saw it in Matt's demo. We're also setting the same kind of configuration for our package here for our demo. And all you need to know here is that I'm creating the custom base map gallery that we will be implementing and placing it inside of the expand. So let's get started. So one thing is my IDE is set up to automatically compile TypeScript, and so to kind of make it easier. Another reason to use one of these IDEs, and it makes development much easier for you. So we'll start off by some boilerplate to create our widget here. And all I'm doing here is I am importing the base map gallery widget. And this is some boilerplate that we use to kind of create a new class. And all I'm doing is setting the actual declared class name for this custom widget, and I am extending the base map gallery widget. So now if I reload, you should be able to see something in the right corner. There we go. So if I expand it, what we see is our out-of-the-box base map gallery widget, and this is because we just extended the same widget without actually providing any custom functionality. So it's using the same render method that the base map gallery item already has. So Matt mentioned that we document all of the source code for our views. So I can follow the same pattern and actually go check out the implementation of this base map gallery. And I'm interested in the render method in particular, so let's go check it out. So for my design, the custom base map gallery modification, I just want to provide wrap the node that is hosting the thumbnail image. So let's look for the actual part here that is rendering that. So I know that the base map gallery is based off the base map gallery items inside of the view model. So here's where I'm creating my items, and I'll just bump the font a little bit more. And I see that I have a render base map gallery item function, so I'll actually go to that one. Okay, so this is the method that I am interested in overriding, because this is what actually renders those items that you see in the base map gallery. And the only modification that I want to do for this demo to keep it simple is I just want to wrap this node that you see right here. So that's the only modification I want. So what I can do is I can copy over this function. I can copy it over. And then I'll get some errors. And this, again, highlights the value in using TypeScript, because it'll immediately let me know that there are some references that I'm missing, some imports that I'm also missing as well. So let's take care of that. And I already have the imports and constants that are missing. So I'll just copy those over. OK, cool. So no more errors, and all I did is copy those missing imports, and I'm also bringing that same lookup object that's used for the setting our CSS classes in our nodes. So remember that I only want to wrap this element here, the image, so I will make my change right here. And notice that I'm just giving that image thumbnail a wrapping node, a wrapping element. And I am just applying a class to this element, and I'm getting an issue because this is a new CSS class that I do not have out of the box in the default base map gallery. So I'll just go ahead and update the CSS lookup object. OK, no more errors. So now if I refresh our demo here, you will see exactly the same base map gallery once it loads. OK, there we go. So this is the same base map gallery, but if visually, but if I inspect the DOM, I can see that this is the node that I added to wrap this image element. So to kind of, in the interest of time, I've already kind of created some 8-bit styles that I showed for the final product. So I'll just copy those over and refresh, and now we'll get something similar to the completed demo. Should be done by this. Should be done by now. So once it loads. Cool, so there we go. So same widget, same functionality. I just tweaked a little piece of the rendering logic, and it still allows me to kind of leverage the out-of-the-box experience from the base map gallery. So yes, that's it for the demo. The class? How I overrode the class? Which class? So this is a new class that's just extending the existing one. And I'm just providing overrides for the methods that the widget already has. So I just modified this little aspect of the rendering logic that takes care of rendering the base map gallery items. Okay. I mean, you can look at the code and kind of see what you would need to tweak if you wanted to modify, if it's not already provided out of the box from the view model or the widget itself. So you said you want to kind of We can do this in the QA section of the presentation. So just hold on to that. Just to recap, I showed how you can reuse an existing view by leveraging how the view and view models work. And we were able to stay in the same ecosystem, so still writing in TypeScript and using the JavaScript API. I didn't need to bring anything extra. And I was able to extend the basemap gallery widget by understanding how the lifecycle works, the different hooks that it provides, and by writing some TypeScript. So with that, we are now leveled all the way up. So you have some weapons in your inventory that you can use to customize widgets. So just to kind of recap the session, we learned the value in being able to provide a theme for your widgets, how to customize it, and also leverage one of the tools that we have to kind of make it easier to create your own theme if you just want to do it the Sass or CSS approach. We learned to recreate a view by understanding how the view model works and by leveraging its APIs to create another UI for it. And we learned how to take an existing view and kind of extend it a little bit, customize it to just make the rendering a little bit different. So some additional resources, you can check it out in the slides. We'll provide a link to the slides at the end. And please, before you leave, or actually after we have the mobile app, so you can do it anytime, but please remember to let us know how we did, how we can improve, rate us. We deeply value your input. And with that, we can move on to questions, such as where can I get the slides and the source? Yeah.
The question was like, by default, you have, let's say, 15 base maps.
Yes.
By default. If I just want to cut down to 5 base maps of my choice,
Yes.
what is that part?
So the question is how I can limit some basemap gallery items to show the number. So in the basemap gallery in the basemap gallery case, there are some APIs you can leverage to kind of filter the results that you get back when the portal loads and the basemap gallery items load before they are rendered. So you can do it there. If you extend the view, you can also tweak the rendering to make sure that you only render up to 15 at the most.
I'm saying 15, so basically, base map gallery has all these items as a base map.
Yes.
Right? So I don't want all the base maps. I only want street map and the world map. Only 2 items.
That's what I'm saying. There's a way of filtering the basemap items through the API. So you can check which basemaps you are getting and decide whether you want to show them in the UI or not. So that's already kind of provided by the APIs themselves. You can do it with JavaScript or TypeScript.
Where is this list coming from?
Well, in this case, it's coming from Portal. So
Let's say I'm not like a line on the portal. It's an independent application. Then in that case, where will that list come from?
So there's another API you can leverage to create your own base maps, and give it to the basemap gallery, and it'll render whatever you give it. So that's another option you have if you don't want to go through the portal.
Yeah, to limit a number, I don't think you need to modify the view. Yeah. You could just the basemap gallery will work off of a ArcGIS Align group, and you can specify what basemaps to include in that group, or you can pass it a JSON object with the basemaps you want to show. So that would be the way to filter or limit just to a few basemaps. But if you couldn't do that, you could also tweak it in the view, but you wouldn't really need to do that in this case. Yeah.
I think we can add a sample to show, because we don't have one in the SDK. We can show how to filter the basemap items.
Yeah, we can do that too.
Any other questions?
Questions? No? Oh, one. Oh. So the question was if you're changing the Sass, if you have to use the same classes, is that kind of the question?
So that the approach that Alan showed is the actual source that we use in the API to author the themes and style the widgets. And all the widgets share and use the same variables that are referenced by that structure. So as long as you don't modify the infrastructure heavily, you should still get all the themes, all the widgets that are still coming or being updated themed the same way. So it gets applied across all widgets.
We don't have options for that now, but isn't there's like a node Sass you could use to compile Sass depending on the user's settings, and that would generate like another style sheet or something, and you have to save that. And yeah, so there's nothing out of the box for that.
Yes, there's nothing out of the box yet, but one thing you could do is that as your application loads, if you have all these themes already pre-authored, you can at that time inject the CSS, the proper theme based on the user. I think you might want to talk to Rene Rubalcaba. He's working on a CLI, and the idea is that after it is installed, you start giving it commands, create an application, and it will lay out it'll scaffold your application for you and make it easier for you to just start theming and including widgets and all that stuff. So that might be one option that you could look into.
There can be more than one. Can you? Is it possible to post that as an example? You're saying get a page.
Do you want to show your page with all the patterns?
Is it already posted over there?
There's a GitHub page with a bunch of patterns for doing stuff like this, and Franco's going to pull it up right now. We just need to reference it more and maybe move it to the Esri GitHub.
So in this repository, we'll be adding, we have a collection of focus patterns that you can kind of take a look at and see, kind of make it easier to learn how you would do different things based on the needs of your widget. And it has an interactive browser with a list of available patterns that you offer. So no, not yet, but. So yeah, this is another resource you can take a look at, and we'll be updating it to add more patterns. You'll get the snippet of the code, as well as right next to it a preview of the actual widget instance. Does that kind of help with the? Cool. Yeah, I agree. I'm hoping to have this more exposed somewhere in the SDK to kind of make it easier to help users find.
Yeah, it'll be easier for users to find examples. Because right now you could just like look at all the views for widgets and kind of piece things together, but this will be more, I guess, a better resource to find that stuff.
Thanks for putting this together, but only thing I request is if you guys can put the sources together at some place, so it's easier for us.
Yeah, we'll try to get this on the Esri GitHub so that it's more official, and then update it frequently as we come up with different patterns. Yeah. Thank you.
More questions? No? All right, thank you.